Hello everyone, welcome. Our times are changing. It seems to me that the old world in which we lived until very recently is not coming back. Not the way we knew it, not the way it was. It began changing the source of power, or the powerful began to change back in the 1970s, but we didn't notice. We notice now because changes are being made in the open. They are no longer hidden. And so, unless you're blind, you have to see them. And the question is what to do, what is to be done. Well, you may be okay with things as they are, and so you have no problems, you're happy with it. Or you may be okay with the way things are, because you don't want to perceive what is happening. Probably your only source of news might be the official media. Or you may be unhappy with it, but don't know what to do. And I fall in the third category, but I'm going to defer this what to do, perhaps for another video. What I'm concerned about here is not with the what to do politically, socially, but how to deal psychologically and spiritually with the rapid changes that are taking place. So rapid, so fast, actually, that we are unable to catch up. Not that we necessarily want to anyway, but feel we are sort of like in a flowing river or a flowing current, flowing in these waters and being carried away, swept away in this flowing river, at times without our wanting it, or not in our control. So I'm going to talk today about how to retreat a little bit. Not that I think that the answer is to retreat, it's just that I'm going to talk about psychologically and spiritually. Perhaps we feel before we start thinking about what to do, that we should step back a little bit, recover a little bit, heal from that concussion that we felt before we move forward. Start sort of a little bit of a retreat as to where we are. I will deal with that a little bit later. But let me start first by saying that and I will lead to this retreat, as it were. But I think what is happening on empires and oligarchies and so on, the classics used to say, always said, that the rule of a society is always either by one or a few or the many. And then it goes back. It actually goes back in a circle, as it were. And Thucydides, in his the famous historian, the second historian, I suppose, in his book The Peloponnesian Wars, about Athens and Sparta. Why am I going back to Athens and Sparta? Because there is nothing new under the sun. We've been through this before. So just bear with me a little bit. He had actually contrasted Sparta's stability of government with the Athenian expansionism. Sparta was stable, but actually it was boldness that contributed to Greece's expansionism, which was for a time more successful. Plato also wrote about an ideal regime for him which would prize honor and military victory. But then that inevitably degenerated, he thought, into an oligarchy prizing wealth. And then that oligarchy, it would degenerate, he felt, into a democracy prizing freedom, and finally always back into tyranny again, prizing the satisfaction of the tyrant or tyrants in their base appetites. So drawing on this classical idea of the one or the few or the many, to go back to the one or the few, the historian Polybius integrated this with his own vision of politics, which he saw as organisms that are bound eventually to die. And the result was his famous account of a natural cycle of constitutional change that is bound to recur again and again. And I'm going to read you one famous paragraph. He says, humans in a primitive state, a state not confined to prehistory, but one that natural catastrophes like floods or earthquakes may repeatedly produce, will, like animals, follow the strongest leader, the condition of despotism. But in associating together, their natural powers of reason will begin to produce ideas of gratitude, honor, and justice, and most fundamentally, utility. On this point was influenced by, Polybius was influenced by the Epicureans, never mind. So that they start to conceive of the leader as a king who benefits them rather than simply as a despot of whom they are afraid. Hereditary kings, however, inevitably become corrupt, turning into tyrants, who are then deposed by leading nobles, who establish aristocracies. But the aristocrats become corrupt in their turn, degenerating, as in Plato, into avaricious oligarchs, and it is the common people this time who revolt and establish democracies. Yet corruption will inevitably set in once again in the person of greedy and ambitious nobles who bribe the common people until eventually the democracy will be convulsed by massacres and destruction, and despotism will reign again. So far, so Greek. And Cicero, in his speeches against Catiline, the tyrant, a person and a moral person, a criminal actually, always conspiring against the Senate for ultimate power for himself, and who Cicero sent into exile, didn't kill him, for which he was much criticized himself, but that's by the by. In his speech to the Senate, mentioning his corruption, the corruption of Catiline, said, and these are his words: These are Cicero's words. How lucky Rome would be if he could indeed get rid of this urban trash. By Hercules, with Catiline alone flushed away, our country already seems refreshed and restored. Or can you think up or invent any evil or crime that he has not conceived of himself? What poisoner anywhere in Italy, what gladiator, what brigand, what cutthroat, what assassin, what forger of wills, what swindler, what glutton, what spendthrift, what adulterer, what loose woman, what corrupter of the young, what corrupt man himself, what degraded individual can be found who does not admit to having lived on the closest terms with Catiline? For years now, what murder has been committed without his involvement? What disgusting sexual outrage without his participation? What other man has ever presented such great temptations to young men as he? Some of them he had sex with in the most disgraceful way, while with others he scandalously submitted himself to their own sexual impulses. To some he promised whatever it was they hankered after, to others the death of their parents, and not merely by urging them on, but by giving active help. And how quickly he succeeded in assembling a vast crowd of the worst of society, not only from the city, but from the countryside as well. Not only at Rome, but even in the furthest corners of Italy, there was not a single debtor whom he failed to recruit to his extraordinary criminal alliance. So that you can appreciate this diversity of his interests and the full range of his activities, there is no gladiator in a training school who inclines ever so slightly to crime who does not also boast of his close relationship with Catiline. And on the other hand, there is no actor at all fickle and useless who does not also claim to be just about his dearest friend. Catiline himself, as a result of his repeated sexual misconduct and criminal activities, had acquired the ability to endure cold, hunger, thirst, and lack of sleep, and was therefore hailed as a hero by people of this sort. If his companions follow where he has gone, if those herds of desperate criminals clear out of the city, how happy we will be, how lucky Rome will be, how highly praised my consulship will be, for theirs is no ordinary depravity, their boldness not natural or tolerable. They think of nothing except murder, except arson, except pillage. They have squandered their inheritances, mortgaged their properties. Their money ran out long ago, and now their credit has begun to run out as well. But those tastes they had in their days of plenty remain the same. If, in all their drinking and gambling, they were concerned only with revelling and prostitutes, they would indeed be beyond hope. But we could put up with them. But who could possibly put up with cowards plotting against men of courage, fools against the wise, drunks against the sober, sluggards against the wakeful, reclining at their banquets, embracing their women, heavy with wine, stuffed with food, wreathed with flowers, drenched with perfume, and worn out by illicit sex, they belch out their plans for the massacre of decent citizens, and the burning of Rome. For my part, I am certain that these men are going to meet their doom, that the punishment long due for their treachery, wickedness, criminality, and self-indulgence is either imminent or at the very least on its way. My consulship cannot cure these men, but if it removes them, it will have extended the life of our state, not for some short period, but for many centuries to come. There is no foreign people we need to be afraid of, no king capable of making war on the Roman people. On land and sea, one man's valor has brought universal peace. The internal war is all that remains. The plots are within. The danger is within. The enemy is within. Our struggle is against decadence, against madness, against crime. Let me tell you, citizens, I am assuming the leadership of this war. I am taking on the hostility of these criminals myself. Whatever can be cured, I will somehow cure. But whatever has to be cut out, I will not allow to remain as a cancer within our state. So let them either leave or stay in peace, or if they stay but keep their present intentions, let them expect what they deserve. Okay, so that was Cicero. As I said, our times are changing. Our whole world is not coming back. So this retreating a little bit to gain back our breath is what is at least working for me. I think that before we think about what to do and how to organize, how to combat, how to flow upstream, as it were, in this river, we need to step back, we need to take stock, we need to reassess what's happening and where we are, because we are still suffering, as I said, from a certain concussion. I feel as if we have been hit on the head with a hammer, politically, psychologically, spiritually. And before we resume into action of any kind, we need a space, a solitary space for a while to recover. We need a short time in solitude, not loneliness, solitude. So please understand that I am not saying retreat into solitude and that is the answer. That is not what I'm saying. I'm saying simply that we need a certain time to stop being carried along, to stop being swept along, to heal from that concussion before we can proceed. We live in very convulsive times, tempestuous, impetuous, hazardous times. And the powers that be, whoever they are, the powerful, are playing a very harsh, a very dirty, violent game with, it seems to me, no moral limits or restraints. You know, since I'm talking about a river, the dike restraining this immoral behavior is indeed a very solid one, strong one. But it has begun to break. It has begun to tear, to rip. We're beginning to see that the water is beginning to filter through in small threads. But it is beginning to rip. And when this happens, it will inevitably end up breaking. There is a spiritual strength in all of us, which is perhaps it has been hidden, that perhaps at one time we lost or was hidden, but that it is beginning to surface now, confronted as we are with its opposing force. That is why I'm talking about retreating a little bit to allow this inner strength to resurface, to come forth little by little. And to help me think about this, I, of course, went back to the classics. As I said, everything has happened before, nothing new under the sun. Just to see if I can draw something, however little, from the wise of old. Look at what Francis Bacon, for example, says on empire. Francis Bacon was born in 1561 and died in 1626. What he says about the powerful. He says, overmuch power leads inevitably to corruption. Why? He says, it is a miserable state of mind to have few things to desire and many things to fear. They are afraid too. He says, because the mind of man is more cheered and refreshed by profiting in small things than by standing at a stay in great ones. He continues, nothing destroys authority so much as the unequal and untimely force of power pressed too far or relaxed too much. A kingdom, an empire may have good limbs, strength, but might at the same time have empty veins, morality, and therefore nourish little. He continues, the emperor will have many foes, the pretenders to the throne, to the empire, the nobles, the aristocrats fighting against him, but also the common people. From them, however, those at the bottom, he feels there is little danger, except when they secure a great and powerful head to lead them, or indeed when the emperor starts meddling with their religion or their customs, social mores, or their traditions, political, or their means of life, economic. The powerful might have much veneration at one time, but little rest. And another author, Defoe, he lived from 1661 to 1731, and he writes on the instability of human glory. He reminds us all that after all, the powerless and the powerful, we're all, after all, mortal. I don't want to depress you with talking about death, but it's something that he wants to remind everyone of. And he says, Sir, he's writing a letter, I have employed myself of late pretty much in the study of history, and have been reading the stories of the great men of past ages, Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, the great Augustus, and many more down to the still greater Louis XIV, and even to the still present John, Duke of Marlborough, and he goes on to mention a few. And after all the great things that they have done, I find it said of them all, one after the other, and then he died. All dead, dead, dead. Here lies is the finishing part of their history. Some lie in the bed of honor, and some in honor's struggle bed. Some were bravely slain in battle on the field of honor, some in the storm of a countess cup and died in the ditch of honor, some here, some there. And then he says, how many hundreds of thousands of the bravest fellows then in the world lie on heaps in the ground, whose bones are to this day ploughed up by the rustics or dug up by the laborer, and the earth, their more noble vital parts, are converted to what has been perhaps applied to the meanest uses. How have we screened the ashes of heroes to make our mortar, and mingled the remains of a Roman general to make a hogsty? Where are the ashes of Cicero and the remains of a Pompey, a Scipio, or a Hannibal? All are vanished. They and their very monuments are mouldered into earth. Their dust is lost, and their place knows them no more. They live only in the immortal writings of their historians and poets, the renowned flatterers of the age they lived in, and who have made us think of the persons not as they really were, but as they were pleased to represent them. As the greatest men, so even the longest lived. The Methuselahs of the antediluvian world, the accounts of them all end with the same. Methuselah lived 969 years and begat sons and daughters. And what then? And then he died. And the French writer Montaigne, he lived from 1533 to 1592. And here brings me to what I want to emphasize today on solitude, writing on customs and traditions. He says, customs and traditions, however arbitrary they might appear, are the cement of society. On solitude, he says, we should set for ourselves a room at the back of the shop. Before Virginia Woolf and a room of one's own, he talks about a room at the back of the shop. In other words, both Martha and Mary, the thinking and the doing. He is not here saying that we should withdraw from the world. We should close up shop. A room at the back of the shop. The shop is still there. In other words, not to retreat from the world as a hermit, but to continue to live with detachment from it, away from the noise a little bit. And Montaigne says, It is reason and wisdom that take away cares, not places affording wide views over the seas. That is a quote from Horace. He says also, ambition, greed, procrastination, fear, desires do not abandon us because we have changed our landscape. Indeed, Socrates, the philosopher, was once told that some men had not been improved by traveling. And as Seneca recalls, he says, I'm sure he was not. He went with himself. In other words, it is not enough to withdraw from the world, not enough to go to another place. We have at times to withdraw from such things of the world as are within us, from their contagion, their taking over. It is our own self we have to isolate and take back into our own possession. Let me read you what Montaigne says here. We should have wives, children, property, and above all, good health, if we can. But we should not become so attached to them that our happiness depends on them. We should set aside a room just for ourselves at the back of the shop, keeping it entirely free and establishing there our true liberty, our principal solitude and asylum. Within it, our normal conversation should be of ourselves, with ourselves, so privy that no commerce or communication with the outside world should find a place there. There we should talk and laugh as though we had no wife, no children, no possessions, no followers, no men servants, so that when the occasion arises that we must lose them, it should not be a new experience to do without them. We have a soul able to turn in on herself. She can keep herself company. She has the wherewithal to attack, to defend, to receive, and to give. Let us not fear that in such a solitude as that we shall be crouching in painful idleness. In lonely places, be a crowd unto yourself. And then, for those like me of advanced age, I don't want to lose all of you youngins, but these are Montaigne words, continuing on this same theme of well-being, of solitude. He says, we have lived quite enough for others. Let us live at least this tail end of life for ourselves. Let us bring our thoughts and reflections back to ourselves and to our well-being. Preparing securely for our own withdrawal is no light matter. It gives us enough trouble without introducing our other concerns. Since God grants us leave to make things ready for our departure, let us prepare for it. Let us pack up our bags and take leave of our company in good time. Let us disentangle ourselves from those violent traps which pledge us to other things and which distance us from ourselves. We must unknot those bonds, and from this day forth love this or that, but marry nothing but ourselves. That is to say, let the rest be ours, but not so glued and joined to us that it cannot be pulled off without tearing away a piece of ourselves, skin and all. The greatest thing in the world is to know how to live to yourself. It is time to slip our knots with society, now that we can contribute nothing to it. A man with nothing to lend should refrain from borrowing. Our powers are failing. Let us draw them in and keep them within ourselves. Whoever can turn round the duties of love and fellowship and pour them into himself should do so. He's not talking about being selfish. He's just talking about resting a little bit and being kind to ourselves. Let him pamper himself, cherish himself, but above all, control himself, so respecting his reason and so fearing his conscience that he cannot stumble in their presence without shame. It is rare for anybody to respect himself enough. Socrates says that youth must get educated. Grown men employ themselves in good actions. Old men withdraw from affairs, both civil and military, living as they please without being bound to any definite duties. So, in other words, subordinate things to you, not you to things. In retreat, we must do, Montaigne says, like beasts. We must do like beasts and scoff out our tracks at the entrance to our lairs. You should no longer be concerned with what the world says of you, but with what you say to yourself. Withdraw into yourself, but first prepare yourself there. It would be madness to entrust yourself to yourself if you did not know how to govern yourself. In other words, detox. Know yourself. There are ways of failing in solitude as there are ways of failing in society. To help you, Montaigne continues, imagine you're always with Cato or Socrates or some wise man. He mentions several philosophers. As a Catholic, I would say, imagine you are with Christ, in whose sight only madmen would try to hide their faults. Solitude, if you're not used to it, is going to prove a little bit uncomfortable to most people. It does. You don't quite know what to do with yourself. But you'll see how, if you have never tried it, you'll see how much comfort it brings in time. So go back to that back of the shop for 1 hour each day. Retreat a little bit. Time to think. Perhaps stop watching toxic propaganda, be it unofficial or official, both. Spend some time with yourself, without news, without phones. Read if that helps, and then think. And gain strength from within. And that's my retreat for today. Thank you. Bye-bye.